presentation. The title, as you can see there, is Universal Design. I just want to let you know before we get started that all of the content from today, copies of the handouts, including copies of additional reading sources, research, can be found on S-Drive, and I'll go over that at the end. But just know that, you know, you get back to your office, you put this somewhere, it gets flittered away somewhere by the end of the semester, you'll still have access to a digital copy, all right? And then as I go through, if you want to hold your questions till the end, I know oftentimes as I'm sitting in sessions, I'll come up with a question and, you know, a few moments later they'll answer it. But if there's anything that I don't address, please feel free to ask afterwards. Well, when it comes to universal design, where did Disability Support Services come up with this idea? Well, the month of March is considered Disability Awareness Month, and in the past we've typically held or hosted student events. This year one of our goals was to reach out and become more of a resource for instructors. And as, I don't remember how I even came across universal design, but as I began reading about it, I thought, wow, this is really perfect for a community college setting. And I think that that will become evident to you as we start speaking or going through this information. Predominantly when it comes to universal design, we started noticing, and by we, I mean the Disability Support Services office, we noticed an increase in students in our offices and wondered, wow, if we're seeing this increase, what does this look like in the classroom? What does it look like for instructors? Are they seeing a similar increase? What dynamics, how does that change their classroom, how they're instructing, and how can we come alongside and be a good resource for them? So I started doing some research on statistics and found that claims for disability benefits were surging in industrialized countries up to 600% in some areas. What this basically did was cause different government agencies, private companies, and unions to start searching, how are we going to get this people group into a working environment? What is that going to look like? To give you more specific numbers, around 10% of the world's population, or roughly 650 million people, live with a disability. Now in the US, what that translates to are approximately 12% of our population. Now, you know, we've got the global perspective, but what does this look like in a community or in a college setting? In roughly a 20-year time span, the number of college students registered with disabilities increased fourfold, all right, in just 20 years. To give you an idea of what that might look like, in 1996, roughly 9.4% of college freshmen, just that first year class, reported having a disability. And here on Ivy Tech's campus, between, or just from January 1st till the beginning of March, in our office we've had 647 visits to our office for information. Now keep in mind that that statistic, there might be, you know, double up, students coming back for a second appointment, that sort of thing. But I mean, in a 2-month time span, that's a significant increase. Now, we're still in that data gathering time frame where we're trying to figure out, okay, so what type of information is going to be important and how do we go about gathering that? But I mean, just in looking at, you know, this basic statistic, it shows us that there is an increase here. Now, as we go into this presentation, there are going to be a couple of definitions that will help in understanding what universal design is and how it can apply to instruction. First, there's a difference between an impairment and a disability. An impairment is basically how actual physical loss or reduction of functioning in an individual. For instance, loss of vision, hearing impairment, movement, speech, or the ability to learn. A disability refers to the way in which an individual with this impairment is disabled by society. So in other words, how are they, what barriers are there to access? What discrimination do they experience? How are they excluded from what others are able to access? During our time here today, there are 4 main things that I want to address. First, I want to touch on some of the historical background, find out, you know, where did the movements begin and how did we end up here at this idea of universal design for instruction. We'll explain the rationale for the application of universal design of instruction. I might start calling it UDI, that's kind of the abbreviated form of it. We'll go through the 9 principles and then we'll talk about some examples. So when it comes to a history, if you look here, there's 3 different colors. All right, if you look in green, these are kind of time frames where there was a recognition in the US culture that there are people that are struggling to access buildings, environments, that sort of thing. And primarily, if you look 1950s, it's right after World War II when vets are coming back. The civil rights movement, I don't know if any of you have heard of Richard Pimentel. He's kind of one of the key figures that have helped lead movements to help veterans in basically the public sphere. And these movements end up translating to laws. Those are the yellow sections there. Predominantly, if you look at Section 504 down here at the bottom, that's of a Rehabilitation Act. And basically what Section 504 does is it's a civil rights law, and it basically prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities. Like that's the overall, overarching, I guess, law for the others. Now, Public Law 94-142 is related to education. When it was first created, it was called the Education of All Handicapped Children Act, but today people refer to it as IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then go a little further down the time frame and you have the introduction of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Now that first started in 1990, but that's been broadened in 2008 with the Amendment Act. So if you are interested in looking up other research, it'll be the ADAAA. And that kind of gives us information as related to students in our classrooms. Basically defining what the term disability means, how that substantially limits the student, and the idea that they are regarded as having a disability. Now if you look here at the orange, you'll see UD defined. UD stands for Universal Design. In 1985, there was a gentleman by the name of Ron Mace. He was at the University of North Carolina, and he started looking first and foremost at physical barriers that individuals were having in society. So someone is trying to get into a building, there are stairs, they're using a wheelchair. How are they going to get over that? So he came up with a series of principles. The idea, and in this series of principles, he described them as universal design. So the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. The idea that we can go through and we can build a wheelchair ramp, but one, it's probably going to be costly, and two, it's not going to look really pretty. So if we start thinking about our population, who our users might be in the most broadest terms, we can plan for those people in our environment. So in essence, universal design are places, products, and systems that everyone can use. All right, picture this. You're at the airport, think back to before they even had the wheelie bags, all right? You try to, carry your luggage, you get to the escalator, and what are you trying to do? I mean, I'm thinking like Charlie Chaplin might have had a great heyday doing something with this, trying to get the luggage through, but he can't figure it out. Now we have luggage that has wheels to make it, low physical impact. We now have ramps that people can use. I mean, even in the mall, there are segments where there are stairs that flank a ramped section so that a variety of different users. The concept of universal design is that you might have started with a very narrow people group in mind, but it expands to a universal design. Other people can end up using this as well. All right, think about the doors with buttons to open them, or the sliding doors that you might see at supermarkets, that sort of thing. All right, before it was to help with a certain people group, but how many times are you walking to school, you have your bag, your whole filing system with you, and your coffee and your lunch and your purse, and you're trying to walk in. Sometimes it's nice to go to those. Doctor allows you to bring your purse too. It might be nice to have that, where you can end up getting through. All right.
What's the center picture supposed to show?
It's a restaurant. So if you think about, look at closed captioning these days. All right, if you go to a restaurant, there's the noise of the kitchen, the people are cooking, you can sometimes hear them yelling back and forth to one another, the chatter at tables. You want to watch what's going on TV, the news is on, but I can't hear it because of all this low-grade distortion, this noise in the background. Closed captioning doesn't just help persons with hearing impairments, it allows other users to look up at the screen and they can read, oh, that's what's going on, now I understand, and they can continue.
Sorry, I did listen to you though. I interrupted that.
No, you're totally fine. Now, when it comes to design, the basic principles that Ron Mace came up with, he looked at the abilities and characteristics of many individuals. He looked at availability and affordability. In other words, how can we make this so that multiple people can use it and not have to pay extra for it? They looked at accessing info through multiple senses, so not just what you can hear, but also what can you see, how can you feel it, that sort of thing. They looked at intuitive design. Is it easy to understand? Basically, is there a shorter learning curve? All right? Think today about some of the technology that's out there. All right, these touchscreen tablets. It's not just now an iPad, okay? It's also transverse to Kindles and Nooks and maybe even into GPS systems. So it's something that people are familiar with, and then they're just transferring that to another segment, all right? Generations, serving people of different ages. All right, I like the picture that they have up there. There's a big chicken and a little egg. All right, it doesn't matter the age, it's going to be usable by a variety of different people. And then last but not least, it reduces physical and intellectual barriers.